really, the complication that we are faced with in modern world is that viruses have always been with us. We've had viruses circulating around the world for many, many years. And interestingly enough, our immune systems have an extraordinary capability of dealing with viruses extremely effectively. The biggest complication is not the virus, but it's actually the other complications of health that conspire to make us so vulnerable. And this is one of the reasons why the most important thing that we have to do in fetal biophysics is to ensure that we can help people with their immune systems. The immune system is fundamentally, utterly tied up with emotions and spiritual issues. And this is why, intriguingly enough, a lot of the research that we've been doing over the years recently has been in how to handle the concept of the heart lock theory, which is absolutely vital to understand. Now, those of you who came to my training course in Malaysia in November, I think you might remember that we were discussing terrible pollution. We were looking at this concept that the world was very polluted. At that time, I don't know if you remember, that Delhi was considered to be the most polluted city in the world, and that at that stage, nobody could breathe. We were talking about how the lymphatic system couldn't flush the toxins in modern society. And we were really very concerned about the concept of 5G, which is a pollutant which affects the breathing and the lungs. We were looking at this concept of pollution and radiation and the real pressures on the lymphatic system. And furthermore, the other research that I'd just been doing, which was actually incredibly important before I came to Malaysia, was this fascinating research that we did in the stem cells of the blood platelets, which are referred to as megakaryocytes. The megakaryocytes have proven to be the most important line of research that we have ever done, for the simple reason that we now realize that these viruses affect us because they attack part of the mucosa of the lung, which is really where the stem cells of the immune system are sourced. The truth is that we produce in the bone marrow megakaryocytes, which are very, very, very important indeed. In fact, we understand that these megakaryocytes are the main ability of our bodies to be able to defend ourselves from airborne pollution, particularly from pollution that can affect our bodies through skin, through the orifices, through the sinus pathways, and fundamentally the energy exchange areas, predominantly the lungs, but also the small intestines and the colon, the energy exchange between our digestive systems. Now, intriguingly enough, the megakaryocytes create megakaryocytes which are released into the blood and carried to the lungs, where they're deposited in the alveolar macrophage. The alveolar system, the alveolar macrophage is the immune system of the lungs. Now, these megakaryocytes are extraordinarily important because when the lungs are damaged by airborne pollution or toxic substances or airborne viruses or anything like G5, unfortunately, these megakaryocytes are stimulated to produce billions, not millions, billions of red blood cells called thrombocytes, or the other name for them is blood platelets. The blood platelets are, we've seen them in bruising and in nosebleeds. And one of the problems with G5, and I do need to talk to you a little bit about G5, is that G5 is having a devastatingly negative effect on the megakaryocytes. Now, the megakaryocytes are much more complex in that they don't just produce blood platelets whenever there is an attack on the human body, both in the lungs and in the small intestines, and in what we call the blind gut, which is the main lymphatic system. But the truth is that these are also precursors to return information from the megakaryocyte back into the bone marrow to activate megakaryocytes, which then create a starburst into the monoblasts, the hemocytoblasts, the progenitor lymphatic cells, the neutrophils, etc., the basophils, the eosinophils, all of these bloods, they're not produced in the bone marrow. It's the blasts, the megablasts, the megakaryocytes, the monoblasts that are produced in the bone marrow. And then these send out signals into the immune system, to the thymus gland, to activate the immune system. It's very, very complex what I'm telling you. But the real truth is that we do need to explore this aspect of our health, because this virus, COVID-19, is entering into our bodies through this concept of the lungs and the megakaryocytes. But we've got 5 lobes of the lung, and we've got 4 quadrants of the heart. And interestingly enough, I'm going to come on to our Gunung Mulu research in a minute. But what I need to say to you here is that if we are going to protect ourselves from this concept of COVID-19, which I'll also talk to you about in a minute, because it's not separate from other viruses, we do have to look back at the heart power formulas. We have to make sure that we protect the heart, because if the heart is in any way endangered, either through the tricuspid upper right quadrant, or the lower right quadrant, the pulmonary, or the upper left quadrant, the mitral valve, which separates it, or the lower left quadrant, which is the aortic quadrant, the lower left quadrant. Behind those heart valves, you have the lungs. Now, again, we have 5 lobes of the lung, and each of these lobes of the lung are the entry point of different illnesses, different bacteria, different viruses. Now, this is where COVID-19 comes in, if you want to regard it as a separate virus, which is standing on its own, which it does not, I have to add. It mutates and adds to other bacteria that people carry. If you have a problem with your tricuspid valve, you are in grave danger, because you don't really know which other heart valves are under duress, but you certainly know that the tricuspid upper right quadrant is under duress, and therefore the quarter of the quadrant of the lung, the lobe of the lung that is under most duress, is of course the upper right lobe. Now, likewise, we do know that there are certain illnesses that will affect this upper quadrant. We know that shingles, herpes zoster, smallpox, measles, these aggressive bacteria that affect the upper right quadrant are very dangerous. Now, if COVID-19 mutates with one of those bacteria, the health problems are very, very serious. And how do we deal with them? We have to use our new research together with Heart Power 2. Likewise, the real aggression of COVID-19 is that it attacks the lungs. And which of our quadrants is predominantly lung, of course, is the pulmonary valve quadrant, which of course is our Heart Power 3, Breathe Freely. And it's for this reason that Breathe Freely has become one of the most important formulas as an armor against COVID-19. COVID-19 has a devastating effect on the alveolar macrophage. And we have another formula that supports the alveolar macrophage, which we know is Olive Love, our special care formula. So Olive Love, Breathe Freely. And again, we have 2 Superfit formulas, which are of particular importance. One is Superfit 5, Breathe, and the other is Superfit 4, Immune T. And these are very, very, very invaluable. So the real truth is that if we're only dealing with COVID-19 and you have somebody with a pulmonary constitution, they're going to be slightly more at risk of specific virus COVID-19. But I also want to point out to you that COVID-19 does not live on its own.